Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well today on this Tuesday morning. If you could please take out your homework from last night, which was the worksheet with the video questions on the video clip that you watched last night for homework. So if you could please take out those questions, we're going to go over them really quick. So the first question deals with who was running for president in 1868? Yes, Thomas. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, the former general from the Union Army during the Civil War, is the Republican candidate, and he is running against Horatio Seymour, which was the Democratic candidate. Now, if you remember from the video, the narrator or presenter in the video clip that you watched contrasted these two candidates very differently. The Republican candidate was the freedom candidate, give African Americans their rights and equality and protect the laws that give them this equality, against Horatio Seymour, who was the racist candidate who wanted to deny African Americans their legal rights and equality. He did not want them to become equal with whites. So very strong contrast in this election. And so before we get to the results, we need to find out a little bit about the election itself. So hopefully you all can see this electoral map here. Which shows the results from the election. And so how did the violence, so this is question number 2 on your worksheet. So did violence from white Southerners prevent African Americans from voting? So Gabby, I like your answer. You said yes, because the states of Louisiana and Georgia voted for the Democratic candidate Seymour. And you said that because of the white intimidation that went on there that prevented African Americans from those states from voting. And I think you have logical reasoning there. And another key point from the video which would support your answer is that the blacks had to go to the polls in groups, and they plotted to go to the polls when there would be the fewest whites there so they could vote. So they were trying to be strategic in exercising the right to vote without causing any racial violence or tension to break out in the voting booth. So can someone provide an answer as to why the violence did not prevent African Americans from voting? Yes, Lewis. Excellent notes from the video on the amount of African Americans that voted in the election. 500,000 black men voted in this election. And Andrew, I like how you added on to that the former Confederate states of Alabama, Florida, and South Carolina voted for President Grant, or Ulysses S. Grant, excuse me. So based on this evidence, it supports the idea that the violence was ineffective because 500,000 African Americans exercised their right to vote, and former Confederate states that have just recently been readmitted into the Union are voting for a Republican candidate largely on the fact that their African American citizens living in those states can vote. So excellent job with that question. So how was American democracy revitalized after the Civil War? So Jess, you said that the African American men could vote and some were even elected into public office, which is absolutely right. And Kelly, I like how you added in your notes, in your answer, that in the span of 10 years, African Americans in the South went from being slaves, which is below the social ladder of standing in society. They went from the dead bottom to holding public office. So in the span of 10 years, African Americans went from servitude and not having any rights to being elected to public office. So that's something you need to wrap your head around, because that's the kind of dramatic changes that are happening in the United States during Reconstruction after the Civil War. African Americans are getting their rights. And so, based on this electoral map here, we can see that President Grant has won the election. And so he is, and remember, he's largely elected on the African American vote. So now what I would like you to do, after a nice job with that homework, you can put that away. Please bring out or go grab one of these vocabulary word map worksheets, and we're going to fill this out for the term black codes. So let me give you a little background on the black codes before you start filling this out. So the black codes were laws in the South that were passed from 1865 and 1866, so right after the Civil War. And these laws were designed to prevent African Americans and former slaves from receiving their rights. Specifically, they were trying to block the 14th Amendment, which gave African Americans equality under the law. So these black codes were set up to prevent African Americans from gaining equality. So based on this knowledge and based on what I've just told you, please write a brief definition in your own words and come up with a couple synonyms, write a meaningful sentence, and draw a picture. So Nancy, I liked how some of your synonyms that you wrote down were racism, white supremacy, and discrimination. Those were excellent words that are similar to the black codes. And I also like Levert the sentence that you came up with, which were the black codes allowed white supremacy to rule the South after the Civil War. So those are excellent connections you guys are making to prior knowledge and stuff we've learned about in the class so far about the black codes, because it's important in today's lesson to keep in mind the black codes, because now we're going to watch 2 video clips, and I would like you all to fill out these questions as we go. The video clips are very short. There's like 3 to 4 minutes. And don't panic if you miss a question. Just write down the answer during the class discussion after both videos have been played.
One of the most tragic aspects of Reconstruction is that the more African Americans achieve, the more they put their lives at risk. I can hear the noise of horses. They Ku Klux Klan.
They had on white gowns, masks on their faces.
75. They were Ku Klux.
They tore the clothes off.
I was blind. Cut me with knives. They whipped me. Put a rope around my neck to hang. Southern Democrats used violence and terror tactics to disrupt Republican control and plot their return to power. They saw themselves as the redeemers of their states.
And it's important to remember that these redeemers were trying to bring the South back to its way of life before the Civil War, where slavery and white supremacy was apparent in society, where the whites were above the blacks and the blacks served them. So it's important that these redeemers do not support the Civil War and are heavily in favor of supporting the black codes and making sure that they're implemented throughout the South.
Violence is efficient, it's easy, it's fast, and you can often do it under the cover of night. Klan attacks become so pervasive because that's how widespread the fear of black enfranchisement is.
Klan is actually committing atrocities against everyone. They're attacking freedmen and white Southerners who were sympathetic to the Union cause and to the Republican Party.
To their eyes, emancipation was wrong. They are washing the South with blood to redeem it.
This isn't simply a question of trying to return to an earlier way of life. This is actually a political counter-revolution.
To document the violence, Congress in 1871 launched one of the most extensive investigations in our history, known as the Ku Klux Klan hearings. The United States never had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission after slavery ended. The Klan hearings were as close as we came. It's extraordinary. Congress was actually listening to Black people, testifying about the atrocities committed against them.
I was elected to the legislature. They offered me $2,500 cash if I would let another man go to the legislature in my place. I told him I would not go back on my people. 65 came to my house. My little daughter came out and begged them not to carry me away. He drew up a gun and threatened her. I may say that they hit me 5,000 blows. Some of them are the first-class men in our town. One is a lawyer, one a doctor, and some are farmers. My little daughter never got over it till she died. I have never got over it yet. It broke something inside of me.
So keep note that these personal accounts that Blacks are sharing at this time are their firsthand experiences with Black codes and racism in the South. So Congress is asking African Americans to share how their experiences and to figure out how serious the Black codes are in the South. And based on the video and the next story we're about to hear, these are very extreme and terrible acts of violence and terrorism going on in the South.
Hearings are open and public.
Women showed up at those hearings, and it took a lot of courage for them. They could face retaliations by the KKK.
But they want the world to know what had been done to them.
All the time I was planting my crop, they worried me about if they ever saw me, they would hurt me.
Whites are really attacking Hannah and her family because they had been too successful. It's jealousy. It flies in the face of the idea that Blacks are inferior.
5 men bulged right against the door. George McCrae catched the little child by the foot and slid it out of my arms. Carried me to a park, tied my hands there, pulled off all my limbs. He said, "Goddamn, you are living on an underman's premises." I said, "No, I'm living on my own premises. I gained 150 for it. They whipped me from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. Every time they would go off, George McCrae would hit me between my legs and say, 'Old lady, don't let me have to do with you. I'll kill you.' He said, 'Goddamn you, I'm gonna kill you.'"
There are 8,000 pages of testimony given by everyday Americans. This is a haunting tale of American history and something that we don't talk about enough. Violence has always been there. It goes side by side in American history to the creation of a white supremacist racial ideology that has driven us from slavery all the way to the present day.
Okay, so let's quickly go over the questions on that first 2 videos. So, one, your answer was that members of the Ku Klux Klan or KKK were the ones who enforced the Black codes in the South, and you would be correct. And Jess, you also added that these KKK members were Southern Democrats who thought they were redeeming the South from Republican ideas in African American equality, which is right. So both of you gave absolutely the right answer. The idea for this question is that the black codes were designed to bring the South back to its way of life before the Civil War, where blacks were not equal to whites. And so, Andrew, your answer for as to why the Ku Klux Klan hearings were important was because Congress wanted to know how bad white imitation, violence, and terrorism was in the South. Congress wanted to know how bad the Klan violence was, and they were listening to African Americans share their own personal stories and testimonies about the racial violence they were experiencing. And this was absolutely correct. We saw 2 personal stories in the video, and towards the end, we saw those highlighted documents, which were testimonies about people that were killed, beaten, whipped. And so the Klan hearings was Congress's way of figuring out how bad the situation is in the South so that they can figure out the appropriate ways to respond to this violence. So this next video that we're going to watch is going to deal with how the federal government is going to respond to the Klan violence in the South.
The Union war hero, Ulysses S. Grant, had run for president under the slogan, "Let us have peace." But as reports poured in from the former Confederate states, it was becoming painfully obvious that the terror was not going to stop.
Grant didn't start out as a hero in terms of race relations. At first, he was very dubious about the fighting abilities of blacks, but he ended up becoming one of the greatest champions of recruiting and arming and equipping black soldiers. He had a remarkable record in terms of integrating blacks into the federal government.
Grant's reaction to Klan violence is a strenuous one. He makes it clear to the Speaker of the House that Congress is going to have to address the situation.
Grant was in step with a Congress that was determined to take action.
And Congress and President Grant are determined to take action because of the horrific stories that they heard about in the Klan hearings.
Congressman Rainey, arguing for protection against the Klan, said that when he and other black congressmen left the seat of government to return home, they were at risk.
There were a couple of incidents where he and others were physically confronted on the road. Only the intervention of federal troops kept things from taking a dire turn. He had absolutely no patience listening to anyone say that maybe the Klan didn't really exist, maybe it wasn't such a big problem. Rainey would say, "Oh, I just saw them a couple of days ago. What are you talking about?" And then go on to deliver a very convincing lecture,
saying that that violence was treasonous and the federal government had an obligation to do something about it.
Congress passed a series of enforcement acts to address the crisis, the third of which is known as the Ku Klux Klan Act.
All of which together were intended to put weapons into the hand of the federal government to directly intervene.
The 14th Amendment established that states could not deprive people of privileges and immunities of citizenship or of due process of law or equal protection of law.
And the black codes are specifically designed to do the exact opposite of the 14th Amendment. Black codes are designed to deny African Americans their equality under the law and deny them their 14th Amendment rights.
What Congress is doing in the Enforcement Act, right, is trying to create a new category of offense using the 14th Amendment to, in essence, get around the fact that Southern courts are not going to convict white Southerners.
Most importantly, the federal government can suppress habeas corpus. Where violence occurred, they can hold individuals for a crime without being charged for that crime. And they can also use the militia or the military to go in and suppress violence.
To spearhead the operation, Grant appointed Amos T. Ackerman as Attorney General of the newly created United States Department of Justice, established in the executive branch in 1870.
He supervises the deployment of federal troops to restrain violence.
Many of the Klan members that believe that they're going to be charged by the federal government begin to run away and hide.
Here's the federal government finally taking the situation with the Ku Klux Klan in hand and directly striking back at it. Difficulty was going to turn out to be persistence.
So that's a key idea right there, what this last speaker alluded to, this idea of continuing to enforce the enforcement acts. So just keep in mind that as time goes on, it's important to recognize the federal government's approach to enforcing these rights. Okay, so let's quickly go over the 3 questions for this video. So, Kelly, you said that the federal government responded to Klan violence by passing the enforcement acts, which is correct. Thank you. And Andrew, your answer for as to why the force acts were significant is because it allowed the U.S. military to go into the South and end Klan violence. And Thomas, I like the analogy or connection that you made, is that the force acts allowed the U.S. Army to go to war with the Ku Klux Klan. That this was not going to end because the government said so. There needed to be some enforcement behind those words, and the only way that those acts were going to, these rights were going to be enforced was if the military went down there and was making sure that at nightfall there was no houses being burned or bricks being thrown into the homes of African Americans. So when I like the connection you make to that, it's kind of a small war down there because there is violence between these two groups to make sure that these acts are being enforced. So excellent connection there. And then the last question, what inferences can you make about implementing the force acts in the long run based on the last speaker's comments about persistence? So Nancy, your prediction was that the KKK would defeat the U.S. military. Yes, that is a possibility. The KKK could win some battles. So we'll have to see over time through the rest of the unit and the readings, videos, if your prediction becomes true. Tony, your answer was that the U.S. military would leave the South and the South would return to its old ways of racial violence. Again, another great prediction and inference using your knowledge from the video and notes. And by the end of this unit, we'll see if that becomes the case. Gabby, you also brought up that the U.S. military would not be able to stop all the Klan violence everywhere in the South, which is true. They couldn't stop everything everywhere at the same time, but as word spread, the Union troops would eventually make their way throughout the South. So it's important to keep your inferences in mind as we study the rest of this unit to see if your predictions were right, because we're going to find an answer to this question by the end of Reconstruction. So the next thing I would like you all to do, nice job with that activity. Thank you for taking detailed notes. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to count off and form 2 groups. So Thomas, you're going to start off by being blue, saying blue, and then Emily, you're going to be orange, Sam, blue, Jess, orange. So please continue this pattern of blue, orange, blue, orange. And based on the color that you have been assigned, you are going to read one of these two articles. So the blue group is going to read this article about the Ku Klux Klan Act, which is basically the enforcement acts we just learned about in the video. And so your job is going to be to read this article and annotate it. And then the orange group, your task is going to be to read this article and annotate it. And the things I want you to look for as you are annotating is to follow this key or this guide. So I want you to highlight important words and concepts. I want you to please circle words you don't understand, and you can either ask me what those words mean, or when you get into partners, you can ask each other. But I want you to identify things you don't understand because we want to clear those things up for you. And I want you to underline the names of important people. And then in the margins of these two articles, I want you to write down any thoughts or commentary that will help you better understand the material. So these can be like little brief summaries of what this highlighted section is. Or if you thought of the connection, write that connection down. But anything that you're thinking as you read this article that will help you better understand it, I want you to write down on the side. Now, I don't want you to write another article down the side, but just write some quick little summaries or bits of information that help you understand the article. And so after reading your assigned article, you're going to be partnered up with someone who read the opposite article as you. So a person who read the blue article will be matched up with a person who read the orange article, and your job is going to be to teach your partner about the article you read. So you can do this by summarizing the main ideas in your article. You can go over the things you highlighted, the things you annotated or wrote on the side, but you need to teach your partner about the material that was in the article you read. Now, I want this to be a conversation between the two partners. I don't want you just to exchange papers, to sit there quietly and skim over the highlighted notes and then move on to the next section. You need to be having a conversation where you explain what you read to your partner. So that's another thing to keep in mind while you're annotating. You need to be able to teach this content to your partner. And then after you're finished teaching each other, you are going to receive this story map worksheet. And from this worksheet, you're going to tell the story of the enforcement acts. So where it says here, title of event, you're just going to write enforcement acts or force acts. And then you're just going to fill out these boxes based on information from your video notes and from the two articles. No, I take that back. Just use the information from the two articles to fill out these events. There is not a certain number of events or key episodes that you need to have, but if you just have one or two, you're missing the point. There's a lot of information, so I would shoot for at least maybe 3 to 5 key events to put down here. That should not be too hard considering that you have 2 articles and you kind of need to outline the main points from the articles in this key episodes. So make sure you have a lot of information down here. And then you're both going to write your names on this worksheet. So please take this worksheet and write blue article at the top and orange article at the top. And then you're going to write your name next to which article you wrote. So this way I know which of you guys worked together, and I know which article you read. So make sure your name, your partner's name, and the articles that you read are labeled at the top of your story map, because you're going to turn this in at the end of class. So you are allowed to move around the room to do this. You don't have to stay at your desks, but I do want you to stay on top. So take the next 5 minutes to read your article, highlight it using the annotation key that we came up with, where you highlight the important words, circle words you don't understand, underline the names of important people. And then once you have finished, you can match yourself up with someone who read the other article, and you can move around the room to teach each other and then fill out the story map. So David, I liked how you highlighted the first sentence of the second paragraph there, which was about the founding of the KKK and who's in that group. That's some very good information there to highlight. I also like the annotation you wrote next to the first paragraph of the Ku Klux Klan Act article, because that first sentence there kind of is a great definition of what the Force Acts were. So great job with annotating. You're on the right track. So Michelle, I liked how on your article here you are underlining the names of President Grant and Senator Morton, because these two representatives in government are very important when talking about the Force Acts. Okay, so you should have had enough time to read the article and teach your partner about your article and fill out your worksheet. So now what I want you to do is to please come to the front desk and place your story maps in a pile. And I want you to go pick up your Chromebooks and take this Google form. It's a brief quiz, just going over some of the key ideas, key vocabulary words, and some of the ideas we talked about today in class. So I want you to pay special attention to the directions up here. So please use complete sentences for these short answer questions. So for these short answer questions, make sure to write 3 to 5 sentences. Some of them, just make sure to write complete sentences. And the last 2 questions here should be a little more detailed, because they're asking a little bit more information from you. So please take the last 5 minutes of class to do this Google form, and then on the way out the door, you're going to pick up another vocabulary word map, and your homework is to just fill out this word map for the word Force Acts. So use your notes, use the article, but when you come into class tomorrow, you're going to need to have all 5 sections of this worksheet filled out. Great job today in class. Thank you for your participation. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow.